Good morning. Hope you're after a great Monday morning wherever you are, whenever you're watching this. It's already shaping up to be a pretty busy news week. So I thought I would jump on, give you a couple news items to have on your radar, crazy hair and all. We'll have a little coffee together. We'll get you ready. We'll get you set up for the week ahead because there are a bunch of news stories to watch, and it's also going to be an historic week in many ways. So first thing to watch is President Biden is going to be traveling to Europe. Over the last several weeks, as we've watched this developing story of Russia's war in Ukraine, we've seen high-profile members of the president's cabinet, like the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense, visit our European allies. But this is a high-profile trip by President Biden at this particular time, nearly a month into the war. So he is going to be visiting our NATO allies in Europe. He also, and we just learned this over the last 24 hours, is going to be making a stop in Poland. Poland is really critical in many ways to this story, not only as a strategic NATO ally and a large country that's along the border of Ukraine with strategic position as well with Russia. But Poland has really bore the brunt of the humanitarian crisis of this war. More than 2 million people have flooded into Poland. And just think about that for a second. Think about if 2 million plus Canadians suddenly flooded in 3 weeks' time into Michigan, what sort of resources it would take to support these people in the right way. And so Poland is really the center of that at this very moment. The United Nations says 1 out of 4 people. So think about this right now. 1 out of 4 of your friends had to relocate. 1 out of 4 Ukrainians had to relocate, whether inside the country or outside the country, because of this war. And so one of the big questions we've been asking, obviously, and it's going to be a big topic of conversation for the president, is what brings this war to an end? How long will this conflict last? And we've talked a little bit about historic context here, where we looked at Russia's war in Chechnya, the Chechen wars. These were multi-year conflicts. But we could also take a look even at our wars, American wars. I mean, think about this. I was talking about this with my husband this weekend, who's is a war veteran himself. Even with America's resources and firepower and organization and technology, it took America 3 weeks to take Baghdad. We were in war in Iraq for just under 10 years. So there is conversation, and I'm sure you're hearing this. I'm hearing this a lot in the press in America, where there's a constant conversation about the disorganization or lack of resources by the Russian military. That is a critical part of the story and one that should be covered. But just because military lacks resources or organization doesn't mean that this still can't be very deadly and last a long time. So what are the off-ramps? What are the potential for this conflict to end? Obviously, that's going to be a big part of our news coverage this week. There's a lot of simmering tensions all over the world, though. We're watching North Korea, as a designated state sponsor of terrorism by the United States government, test fire different missile systems. We're continuing to watch the civil war in Yemen, another site of a catastrophic humanitarian crisis that's lasted for years. The Houthi rebels in Yemen are backed by Iran. This group has been firing rockets into Saudi Arabia. And according to the Wall Street Journal, the United States just recently is giving Saudi Arabia some very advanced anti-rocket or anti-missile technology, anti-missile systems. Now, I'll be curious to see if the United States confirms that today, if we hear more about that. But that would be a big development because it's talking again about rising tensions in the Middle East. We've been covering Iran's rocket attacks in Iraq. We're continuing to watch tensions with China, with the question about whether or not China is supporting Russia. And President Biden and President Xi of China have talked over the last several days. So there's a lot going on, and it's a reminder about how interconnected all of us really are. Let me give you an example. One of the stories we continue to watch on Smarter News is what's happening at the U.S. southern border. And every month we get a report card about that. Just last week, we got the latest report card. It's continuing to show a historic pace of numbers at the U.S. southern border, a historic pace of encounters. So these are people coming across the border being encountered by law enforcement. And one of the side stories to this, and this has come up just over the last couple of weeks, is that we're seeing a rising number of Ukrainians and Russians at the U.S. southern border looking to apply for asylum. Here's the key about asylum. You have to be on U.S. soil to apply for asylum. This is one of the reasons why you see people cross the border illegally, but when they are encountered by law enforcement, when they say they're asylum seekers, their legal status changes because under U.S. law, if you're an asylum seeker, you're treated differently than, let's say, somebody that's encountered as part of trying to commit a crime in the country, for example. So this is a growing story that we should also watch, and it's just another way, again, that these stories and the domino effects of what's happening in Eastern Europe are affecting really the entire world. One of the things we're going to be watching in Washington, D.C. has to do with what's happening at the U.S. Supreme Court. You have Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson going in front of the Senate. This is what a Supreme Court nominee has to do. The president is able to nominate someone, but they do have to go through an approval process in the Senate. And by the way, Judge Jackson has done this before in previous roles. She had to face a Senate hearing, and so experience matters here. So this is something that she's done before, but it'll be a really interesting few days where she gets to introduce herself to lawmakers in a more public setting. She's had a lot of meetings behind closed doors, but this will be in a public setting. And then over the next couple of days, she's going to be answering questions from lawmakers. Again, going back to historic context, over the course of American history, when a president nominates someone for the Supreme Court, usually that person is approved by the Senate. In some rare cases, they are not. We're not expecting that here for a couple different reasons. One is the fact that Judge Jackson she's not going to be changing the balance of the court. Now, Supreme Court justices would not describe themselves likely as, liberal or conservative because they're not supposed to be political, but the media and others assigns them this sort of status. You're a liberal justice or you're a conservative justice, depending on what president of what party, what the affiliation of that president. So if the president was Republican and you were nominated by that president, then you're a conservative justice. And in this case, President Biden is a Democrat. So Judge Jackson is considered a liberal nominee. The justices themselves may not look at themselves that way, but she would be replacing Justice Breyer. Justice Breyer is considered a liberal justice. So she would be replacing that. She would not be changing the dynamic of the court, making it more liberal, for example, where she could be facing tougher questions. And of course, we don't want to forget this. Judge Jackson is the first female Black judge to be nominated to the Supreme Court. If confirmed, she will make history as well as the first Black female justice to sit on the Supreme Court. So we'll watch what happens this week. And these hearings, by the way, last all day. So they start today. We'll pull for you the best highlights as we can. So give you a little snippets and a little taste of what the conversation's like and also how she's talking about herself and her experiences. Because, no matter any sort of political affiliation, if you make it to the point where you're a Supreme Court nominee, you're usually a pretty fascinating person. So I like these opportunities where we get to actually hear from the justices themselves once they sit on the court. They don't talk as publicly as this. So this is a really rare and interesting opportunity. Final thing, this is a topic of hot debate. So I'm going to leave you with this because I'm curious your opinions. One of the things that we've seen by the Senate, some movement in the Senate, a bipartisan support, is movement on legislation to make daylight savings time the time of the land. So we would no longer change our clocks. We would just be in daylight savings time. Now, even though the Senate passed the legislation, it has to go to the House. The House would have to pass it. It'd have to go to the president. I mean, there's a lot of steps, and it doesn't really look that the House is that motivated to take this up. One of the reasons is there's now a debate about whether or not daylight savings time is what we should be making the law of the land. So whether or not standard time would be better. And the reason for this, doctors say, is that in the depths of winter, there would be parts of the United States that would be dark in the morning until like 9 o'clock. Even this morning, my little girl was saying, "Oh, Mom, we're early for school." And I'm like, "We're late for school. We're late. It's just dark outside." Because she thought, wow, look how early we are. But it's just because the clocks changed. It's still dark here early in the morning. So it's not as easy as a conversation as one might think. Obviously, if you're in a state like Arizona, you don't have to worry about this. But for so many of us, this is a big deal, especially parents, where the clock change just is so disorienting in so many ways for your family. So I'm curious. Should it be daylight savings time? Should it be always? Should it be standard time? Should it be always? Or should we just table this issue until we have a really boring news cycle and can really properly dig into it? That's what I'm curious. Look, I had to put the light on today. It's still sort of dark outside. It's just after 8 o'clock. It's hard working in this environment. Just real quick, because I'm just going to leave you with this. I actually recorded this once before, but there's a little button right here. and it was on the whole time. So I recorded myself in silence. So that's what happened to me this Monday. I hope your Monday's off to a better, smoother sailing. And I hope this gives you a foundation for the week ahead. All right, guys, questions and comments, let me know. And as always more on all of these developing stories on smarternews.com. Have a great week.